Hello and welcome back, boys, girls, and NBs. Today we're going to be talking about the second lesson in the book LSAT Trainer by Mike Kim. This second lesson is the logical reasoning basics. So we're going to dive right into the lesson today. There's not much personal stuff that I really want to talk about. Um, yeah, other than, like just continue to keep goal setting and reworking some things that need to be reworked every once in a while. And yeah, just enjoying my days off from work or my nights rather. So, yeah, anyway, we can get started here and just get started right into the lesson. So, in this lesson, we'll start getting to know logical reasoning questions, define our goals and our gauges, and chart a path to success. In just a couple of pages, we'll take a look at 4 questions that will give you a taste of what various logical reasoning questions feel like. Then we'll dig a bit deeper into the underlying design of those questions. We'll do this by discussing the priorities of the test writers. All right, so taking notes here. The priorities of the test writers. And the specific skills that logical reasoning questions require. Specific skills of logical reasoning. These skills and the habits required to apply them. Habits required to apply required skills. Success. These skills and the habits required to apply them successfully will also help us define the goals of our study process. Properly defining goals. Next, we'll start discussing specific ways to gauge our progress. Whether or not we get a question correct is the most objective and blunt way to gauge comfort level and ability. However, uh, so instant feedback from answering correctly or incorrectly. However, the reality is that in order to get any one logical reasoning question correct, we need to do several things well, and a wrong turn at any point can steer us toward the wrong answer. To get any one question right, we need many skills. Thinking about whether we got questions right or wrong does not give us the type of detailed analysis we need to identify and address specific issues. Maybe we are missing a certain type of question because we don't actually understand exactly what the STEM is asking for. Misunderstanding what the STEM question is asking. Or maybe we misunderstand what we were supposed to be looking for in certain incorrect choices. Maybe there is a reasoning flaw that we consistently have trouble seeing. How exactly are we supposed to know? Hopefully, one of the key benefits of this book will be that it helps you develop a clear, simple, and logical sense of what it is exactly that the exam requires of you at each step along the process. We'll get started on that in this lesson. One way we'll do this is by discussing the specific skills and habits that define top scorers. Skills and habits of top scorers. We'll also, both in this lesson and throughout the book, model the real time performance of a top scorer so that you can get a sense of his priorities, how they prioritize information, and so that you can compare and contrast your experience with this. Having a clear sense of the end goals, having clear markers that tell you that you are fast on your way, and being able to reliably evaluate your performance on a step-by-step level will help keep you in firm control of your study trajectory. It will not, unfortunately, mean that you will automatically improve at a certain pace. It will mean that you know what you're good at and what you need to work on, and what you'll have a and that you'll have a very good sense of what you need to accomplish in order to get where you want to be. In this lesson, we'll start getting to know logical reasoning questions, define our goals and gauges, and chart a path to success. We will end this lesson by laying out a 3-stage plan for conquering the logical reasoning section. We'll plan the work to be done at each stage and also discuss how to incorporate these logical reasoning lessons with the work you do in LSAC's Law Hub, online question bank, or printed books. Details, details, details. Basic facts about logical reasoning. 2 of your 3 scored sections will be logical reasoning. Recently, all logical reasoning sections have had 25, the most common, or 26, the less common of the 2 types of exams questions. 25 questions in 35 minutes works out to about a minute 20 per question. However, keep in mind certain questions will take far less time and others are designed to take more. Each question consists of a stimulus or a prompt, a question stem, and 5 answer choices. The stimulus will typically be 2 or 3 sentences in length. The question types are clearly defined and their frequencies are fairly consistent test to test. Question types are listed on page 36 of the trainer. Each question has 1 clearly correct answer and 4 clearly incorrect wrong answers. In past years, occasionally there would be 2 questions related to 1 stimulus, but this trait has disappeared in recent years. Thank God. Having 2 question stems, that's crazy. That would take a really long time. About 2/3 of all questions require a subjective approach from the test taker. All the stimuli for all subjective questions contain arguments, reasons given to justify a point made. For all questions that require us to think critically, our job will be to evaluate the relationship between the conclusion reached and the support for that conclusion. About 1/3 of all questions require an objective approach from the test taker. These questions require no evaluation or reasoning and are primarily designed to test reading abilities. Over the course of a section, the difficulty of questions fluctuates according to somewhat consistent and predictable patterns to be discussed in later lessons. The average test taker gets anywhere from 10 to 12 wrong per 25 questions section. That's a lot. They get almost half of them wrong. The average test taker does per 25 questions. That's kind of amazing. Anyway, I was gonna say impressive, but I mean, in a way, it is kind of impressive to the test to like, I guess the testimony of the test writers, right? They know how to write a test. A 170 plus test taker will consistently get anywhere from 0 to 3 wrong per 25 question section. And that's what we're aiming for. That's what I'm aiming for. I need the score in that top percentile to get into the school that I want. Like, I have to. There's no other choice. So, yeah, it's going to be quite a ride. I mean, like, I think that the minimum score, according to the calculator, and maybe I talked about this, is I need to get at least a 165. And a 160 might get me considered. It'll get me considered at some schools for sure, but not necessarily the school that I want. So, yeah, I got some studying to do. But so we'll jump into these questions here. We got some sample questions. Below are 4 logical reasoning questions that have appeared on past LSATs. Set a goal of completing all of them in 6 minutes or less, but take a bit more than that if you need to. We'll return to these questions later in this lesson. Yeah, we're going to take longer because A, I'm going to be typing them out, and then B, we're going to be going over every question in detail, right? So we're going to be talking about the prompt, we're going to be talking about the stem, and then we're going to be talking about the answer bank. So yeah, we can start question 1. All right, most antidepressant drugs cause weight gain. While dieting can help reduce the amount of weight gained while taking such antidepressants, some weight gain is unlikely to be preventable. All right. So the main part of this is antidepressant drugs. Most antidepressant drugs cause weight gain. And while the chances of weight gain can be reduced by dieting, in some cases, weight gain is unlikely to be preventable. So the following are the information above most strongly supports which one of the following? I hate the auto formatting in Word. A physician should not prescribe any antidepressant drug for a patient if that patient is overweight. That is incorrect on so many levels, but I mean, if you, we don't need to get into the nitty gritty of, like prescribing medications, but I mean, like being overweight likely isn't a contraindication for being prescribed an antidepressant, even if one of the side effects is weight gain. So, um, no, incorrect. People who are trying to lose weight should not ask their doctors for an antidepressant drug. Again, this statement would be like totally incorrect. I mean, wow. Just because you have some fitness goals or weight loss goals, but you're depressed, also, your depression could be more of an emergency or at least an urgent medical situation. Your your depression is probably much stronger medical situation than you losing weight, right? So that statement doesn't follow either. And maybe my reasoning is flawed when I'm thinking of, like why that's an incorrect statement to the information given. But um, I think that, yeah, those two statements are wrong. We'll continue on. At least some patients taking antidepressant drugs gain weight as a result of taking them. That's the most correct statement so far. In fact, it probably is the most correct statement. At least some patients taking antidepressant drugs gain weight as a result of taking them. That strongly supports the information given in the prompt very strongly. The weight gain experienced by patients taking antidepressant drugs should be attributed to a lack of dieting. Again, like that is a wildly incorrect statement, like uh, according to the information given in the prompt. Um, whether or not a patient diets is not a factor in the information given. In fact, it says the opposite. Well, dieting can help reduce the weight gain, like even if they, what this statement supports is that, um, like through inference that even if a patient is dieting, weight gain is unlikely to be preventable, right? So that statement is very incorrect. All patients taking antidepressant drugs should diet to maintain their weight. This statement is partially correct, but I don't think that it most strong. I don't. So the look here, the STEM question is most strongly supports. So this statement, while it's somewhat correct, it doesn't, like most strongly support the information given in the prompt. So all patients taking antidepressant drugs should diet to maintain their weight. Like, yeah, possibly. Um, but again, even if even if all patients are dieting, some weight gain is unlikely to be preventable, right? That's why C is the correct answer. At least some patients taking antidepressant drugs gain weight as a result of taking them. We can even highlight this one. All right, on to question 2. Some statisticians claim that the surest way to increase the overall correctness of the total set of one's beliefs is never change that set except by rejecting a belief when given adequate evidence against it. However, that if this were the only rule followed, then whenever one were presented with any kind of evidence, one would have to either reject some of one's beliefs or else leave someone's beliefs unchanged. But then, over time, one could only have fewer and fewer beliefs since we need many beliefs in order to survive. The statisticians claim must be mistaken. The argument is most vulnerable to criticism on the grounds that it stop automatically creating notes, please. I hate that. I really hate it. I really hate Microsoft Word sometimes because it automatically does like a variety of things that are just like at minimum annoying and sometimes like detrimental to the format. All right. Anyway, answer A. Okay, the argument is vulnerable to criticism on the ground that it presumes, without providing any justification, that the surest way of increasing the overall correctness of the total set of one's beliefs must not hinder one's ability to survive. Yeah, I don't think the argument supports that presumption. That the surest way to increase the overall correctness of the total set of one's beliefs must not hinder one's ability to survive. Right. This one is a subjective, right? So I mean, it's arguing it from a subjective stance that uh, you never change that set except by rejecting a belief when given adequate evidence against it, right? But the evidence has to be adequate. It doesn't say correct or incorrect. I mean, you could be presented adequate evidence that is evidence that leads to wildly wrong conclusions. And you would, according to that logic, change your belief system based on the evidence you were presented into believing something that would be detrimental to possibly your existence. Um, so since we need many beliefs in order to survive, you know, that's making a statement, right? So yeah, but yeah, I think that this one is incorrect based on the presumption that increasing the overall correctness of the total set of one's beliefs must not hinder one's ability to survive. All right. Well, let's take a look at the next one. Neglects the possibility that even while following the statistician's rule here, one might also accept new beliefs when presented with some kinds of evidence. This one's false also because uh and this one glaringly so because uh we're not just looking for like some kinds of evidence, right? Uh, what we're doing is rejecting a belief when given adequate evidence against it. Not just some kinds of evidence, like adequate evidence, right? So B is also an incorrect answer based on the way that it presents the neglect of the possibility. The overlook. Uh, the argument is vulnerable to criticism on the ground that it overlooks the possibility that some large sets of beliefs are correct overall, are more correct overall than are some small sets of beliefs. This one overlooks the statement made since we need many beliefs in order to survive. So overlooks the possibility that some large sets are of beliefs are more correct overall than are some small sets of beliefs. All right. But over time, if we reject a belief when given adequate evidence against it, if we follow this rule, then whenever one were presented with any kind of evidence, oh, maybe B does present. One would have to either reject someone's beliefs or else leave someone's beliefs unchanged. Okay. B, I think B is still incorrect in that statement. But I think C also overlooks something. Okay, D takes for granted that one should accept some beliefs related to survival, even when given adequate evidence against them. That actually does track, but actually that kind of does track in a couple different ways. So, take for granted that one should accept some beliefs related to survival when given adequate, even when given adequate evidence against them. So, uh, if we're looking at how the rule is applied, then whenever one is presented with any kind of evidence, one would have to either reject someone's beliefs or else leave someone else's beliefs unchanged. Or leave not someone. I totally misread that. or leave one's beliefs unchanged. That does make more sense now. So what would so this is the meat of the rule. One would either have one would have to either reject some of one's beliefs or else leave one's beliefs unchanged. So you can reject even when presented with adequate evidence or any kind of evidence. And this takes for granted that one should accept some beliefs related to survival even when given adequate evidence against them. Oh wait, no, it doesn't track actually. Because it breaks the rule. But maybe we are setting out the bricks and rules. All right, E. It takes for granted that the beliefs we need in order takes for granted that the beliefs we need in order to have many beliefs are all correct. That actually probably is the most correct statement according to this. So the argument is vulnerable to criticism on the ground that it takes for granted that the beliefs we need in order to have many beliefs are all correct beliefs. Because we can still follow the rule, and if the rule were followed, then whenever one were presented with any kind of evidence, one would have to either reject some of one's beliefs or else leave one beliefs unchanged. We can follow the rule by leaving our beliefs unchanged, right? Uh, but the argument is vulnerable to criticism that it does take for granted that the beliefs we need in order to have many beliefs are all correct beliefs. So I think that E is the correct answer in this scenario, in this statement of like logical conundrum. All right, let's continue on. Question 3. Several critics have claimed that any contemporary poet who writes formal poetry that is rhymed and metered, is performing a politically conservative act. That's a reach, but this is plainly false. Consider Molly Peacock. And Marilyn Hacker. Two contemporary poets whose poetry is almost exclusively formal, and yet who are themselves politically progressive feminists. The conclusion drawn above follows logically if one of the following is assumed. All right. No one who is a feminist is also politically conservative. That can be incorrect. No poet who writes unrhymed or unmetered poetry is politically conservative. That might actually be the one of the correct conclusions. We'll see if there's a more correct one. No one who is politically progressive is capable of performing a politically conservative act. uh, that's wildly incorrect. And the Renegade Kautsky comes to mind immediately. Lenin's writings on the Renegade Kautsky. Check them out because that one is a statement. That statement right there, like wildly incorrect, and Kautsky is the example. Anyone who sometimes writes poetry that is not politically conservative never writes poetry that is politically conservative. Anyone who sometimes writes poetry that is not politically conservative never writes poetry that is politically conservative. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you only sometimes write poetry that is not politically conservative, how could you never write poetry that is? At least some of the time you'd have to be writing. Yeah, that statement just logically doesn't follow altogether. And then the content of a poet's work, not the poet's form, is the most decisive factor in determining what political consequences, if any, the work will have. Even though this is a correct logical statement, the conclusion drawn above follows logically if one of the following is assumed. So we'll have to go back and read the prompt, right? So several critics have claimed that any contemporary poet who writes formal poetry, poetry that is rhymed and metered, is performing a politically conservative act. The act of writing formal poetry, right, is the political act. But this is plainly false. Consider Molly Peacock and Marilyn Hacker, two contemporary poets whose poetry is almost exclusively formal, and yet who are themselves politically progressive feminists. So, but we're writing on this right here that this and this are the basis. Molly and Marilyn are kind of uh they're they're trying to this statement, like this part of this statement is trying to say that these two provide exceptions or that prove the rule, that prove that this is plainly false. Actually, maybe E is the most correct answer. I feel like E probably is the one that follows logically. The content of their work. Because this statement says that this statement is false. And then these two are presented as contemporary poets who almost exclusively write in a formal way, and yet who are themselves politically progressive feminists. And the content of the poet's work, not their form, is the most decisive factor in determining what political consequences, if any, the work will have. So I think that it is E, actually. All right. And then last question in this, the higher the altitude, the thinner the air. Since Mexico cities altitude is higher than that of Panama City. the air must be thinner in Mexico City than in Panama City. Which of the following arguments is most similar in its reasoning to the argument above? Oh, and they're kind of abstract, so okay, we're gonna have to read each answer and compare it against the prompt, like we do with all the other ones. But this one is, yeah, you'll see in a second. As one gets older, one gets wiser. Since Henrietta is older than her daughter, Henrietta must be wiser than her daughter. That statement is assuming some things about Henrietta's and her daughter's experience that isn't measured in the statement. So like, yeah, we can go along with the these old fashioned rule that as one gets older, one gets wiser, right? And people do acquire experience over time, but that doesn't mean that Henrietta necessarily is wiser than her daughter, even though she is older, right? So continue on. The egg whites used. Oh, the more egg whites used, the more egg whites used, and the longer they are beaten, the fluffier the marin the meringue. Oh, the meringue. The fluffier the meringue. Since Lydia used more egg whites in her meringue, than Joseph used in his. Lydia's meringue must be fluffier than Joseph's. That one actually does track according to the higher the altitude, the thinner the air. B is pretty correct so far. So the people who run the fastest marathons these days are faster than the people who ran the fastest marathons 10 years ago. Charles is a marathon runner. So Charles must run faster marathons these days than he did. Nothing about that statement follows. Wildly incorrect. Okay. The older a tree, the more rings it has. The tree in Lou's yard is older than a than than the tree in Teresa's yard. Therefore, the tree in Lou's yard must have more rings than does the this statement seems incorrect also because it's assuming quite a lot in this statement that the trees that everything being equal about the trees, that they're the same species given the same amount of nutrition and rainfall and sunlight and any of the other factors that contributes to like a tree's growth and health and the way that it grows and forms itself, right? Because like we've all seen trees that grow inside and around features in the environment like fences or um, any other number of things, right? That it interacts with. So yeah, that that statement is assuming quite a bit. I think it's incorrect. So far, B is the one that follows the most closely with the above prompt. All right, the bigger the vocabulary a language has, the harder it is to learn. English is harder to learn than Italian. Therefore, English must have a bigger vocabulary than Italian. Yeah, and this statement is incorrect also. I mean, it's uh, comparing wildly different statements on different metrics, even. So here we're saying that the higher the altitude, the thinner the air is. Where this is saying, like, and this is making like a totally different type of statement, even. That this is a quality thing. and we're comparing two quantity things. The higher, the thinner. I guess you could say this could be a quality thing, but it seems to me that here we're saying the more egg whites used, the fluffier the meringue. So I think that B is the most correct statement. All right, so let's take a look here. So logical reasoning questions are hard. Yeah, a little bit. I mean, you definitely have to think about it and dissect each one. And I mean, like, obviously, since we're an hour in already, we've spent way longer than 6 minutes and way, way longer than a minute and 20 seconds looking at these questions and analyzing them. So, as we can see, um, yeah, there's quite a bit to. Some of these are easier to answer than others, like he stated, like Kim stated, but also, um, yeah, we have some information in our test, our in our answer banks that need to be parsed out. Also, right? We can't just parse this information and then go and then just simply answer the question. Like, we have to think about what's in these answers also, because yeah, and I mean, like, it's like any other test, like there's going to be answers that are uh, somewhat correct, and then there's going to be other answers that are the most or the best correct, like, or states it in the best correct way. So yeah. Anyway, logical reasoning questions are hard. Maybe not for you. Maybe you found the four questions on the previous page to be a walk in the park. And I mean, like, I I wouldn't necessarily say that they were a walk in the park, but I mean, like, I'm pretty confident that that I was able to answer these four questions correctly. Um, we shall see, of course. But and then if I didn't, I mean, it's still a learning experience, right? There's nothing to be embarrassed about. That you get some questions wrong, especially like on the first try, on the first attempt, like without any foreknowledge or practice. So, um, and we're starting to learn these concepts too, right? So, any incorrectness uh, could be, like blind spots that we need to correct, right? It's all still a learning experience, And like I said, like looking at this guy right here in the background that I have, like to um, hide the room that I'm sitting in, like old Papa Marx, talked about developing ways to think about your problems and contradictions in a dialectical way, right? Like that there is a thesis and an antithesis, and then we're going to uh like smash them together or find some way that they break each other and then create a synthesis, right? We're looking to dialectically think about, like our blind spots, our weaknesses, our flaws in this test taking process, and then demolish them based on the new information that we get, and then re-evaluate and synthesize them into a more correct way of thinking. But keep in mind that in order to get a 170 score, you need to consistently be able to get about 9 out of every 10 of these questions correct, and you need to be able to do so in an extremely time efficient manner. Because remember, any unanswered question is considered a wrong answer. So, before we go further, let's just vent for a bit about why logical reasoning questions can be difficult. 1. The stimulus or statement contains a significant volume of information. Yeah, they're pretty dense. They can be pretty dense questions. Information that seems to be connected but is also often disorganized. It can be too much information for us to retain all at once. The volume of information contains an unusual number of specific details. You can't keep track of all of them all, but at the same time, it's tough to know which ones are more important and which ones less so. The test stems seem simple enough, but the test writers are actually asking you to do very specific things. Yeah, so the STEM questions seem simple, but are asking you to do very specific things. And it's tough for you to know at this point exactly what they're going for. The answer choices are often written in a way that makes it difficult to understand what they actually mean. The answer choices can be vague or misleading. And finally, most of the answer choices are attractive in some way. Most answer choices are such that they could be correct if you thought about the stimulus or your task in a slightly different, slightly incorrect way. Let's say the incorrect answer choices. So, if the stimulus or STEM is misunderstood or thought of, or reevaluated in an incorrect way. So the worst part of it is that these issues compound one another. If by the time you get to the answer choices, you have a good but not great understanding of the argument and a good but not great understanding of the test presented to you in the question stem, it'll be next to impossible for you to anticipate the characteristics of the right and wrong answer choices. Without some sort of compass, your task of selecting the right answer becomes monumentally more difficult. Several answers may look attractive. The question may seem arbitrary, and right and wrong themselves somewhat subjective. How do questions feel for top scorers? They feel hard. However, the difference is that top scorers have the skills and habits necessary to meet the challenges. Of course, in order to develop these skills and habits, it helps to know exactly what we are up against. Let's take a macro look at exactly what it is that logical reasoning questions are designed to test and discuss how the questions test these issues. We'll return to the questions you've just solved and discuss them in more detail later in this lesson. All right, good, because I'm really curious about the answers. Know what matters. Do you remember first learning how to solve word problems in your elementary school math class? Neither do I. But I do know this. If told a story about adding 3 dogs to 2 dogs, some children will naturally think about what types of dogs they are. Irrelevant information. And others will naturally think about what 3 plus 2 is, which is the correct way of thinking about the problem at hand. Guess which ones will have an easier time learning how to solve word problems? Logical reasoning questions are very much like mathematical and word problems. The math word problem has within it some specific underlying mathematical issue, and the purpose of the word problem is to gauge your mastery over this issue. To the writer of the word problem, the subject matter and the situation are secondary in importance, or at best, a tool to distract students from the math issues that are important. Logical reasoning problems have buried within them specific reading and reasoning issues, and the purpose of logical reasoning problems is to gauge your mastery over these issues. To the writers of these questions, the subject matter is secondary, or at best, a tool to distract. So, like math story problems, the subject, yeah, the subject matter of logical reasoning problems is secondary, or at best, a tool to distract from the reasoning problem of the stimulus. It is, of course, to your advantage to be able to see questions in terms of what is important to the test writers, to be able to see the questions with the covers off. If you are consistently able to do so, you will find that the logical reasoning section becomes far more understandable and predictable. With that in mind, let's talk in a basic and fundamental way about the three issues that logical reasoning questions are designed to test. Uh, Three issues logical reasoning questions are designed. Your reading ability, your reasoning ability, and your mental discipline. Not getting off track, not getting distracted by your own thoughts, even, or going back, like, and reevaluating, like this uh, statement here. Incorrect answer choices can often be attractive if the stimulus or stem is misunderstood or reevaluated in an incorrect way. Don't go about tripping over your own thoughts here. We're trying to evaluate, not keep reevaluating ourselves into a wrong premise or a wrong answer. Logical reading questions test reading ability. Reading is fundamental to daily modern human existence. We are all excellent readers, and we all read countless things every day. No standardized exam, certainly not one that only takes a few hours, can gauge something as varied and significant as general reading ability. Why do I mention that? Because it leads us to something that is really important to understand, something most test takers do not. The LSAT does not test a broad range of reading skills. No standardized test of its type can. The LSAT is designed to gauge very specific reading skills. Two such skills, to be exact: your ability to read for reasoning structure. Okay, so the LSAT is designed to gauge. Oh, damn it. Two very specific reading skills. Your ability to read for reasoning structure, and your ability to understand the correct meaning of words that are used in common reasoning discussion. The reasoning structure of a statement is simply the relationship among the parts of that statement. We all naturally read for reasoning structure, always. When we see two sentences next to each other, without telling ourselves to, we think about and, in general, easily understand how they are meant to go together. The writers of logical reasoning questions are very interested in gauging exactly how good you are at being able to see how phrases are meant to go together. Most of the time, the pieces will come together in order to service an argument, which for the purposes of the LSAT, we can think of simply as a point made and reasons given for that point. If you are consistently able to see arguments clearly, the test writers will offer up reward after reward. For many questions, just seeing the argument clearly is the key to making your work far easier and faster. So, right, when evaluating, when reading and evaluating prompts and questions, if you if you're able to see if you're able to consistently see the arguments clearly, if you're consistently able to. Consistently being able to see the arguments clearly is the key to making your work easier and faster. And we do have something in the sidebar here. So the LSAT is designed to gauge two specific reading skills: your ability to read for reasoning structure and your ability to understand the correct meaning of a few commonly used words. Both of those are very important. So we will be discussing reasoning structure quite a bit in both the logical reasoning and reading comprehension sections. This is because I believe almost anyone can become extremely good at recognizing reasoning structure correctly, and I've seen time and time again that the ability to do so serves as a vital characteristic of all top scorers. So, seeing and recognizing the reasoning structures correctly is a skill and habit of all top scorers. The other reading skill you will be tested on is your ability to correctly understand the meaning of certain words commonly used in general reasoning and discussions. Words like must, because of, most likely, some, and or. The other part of reading and understanding correctly. Commonly used. The the other part of reading is understanding commonly used words. In general reading or general reasoning and discussion. Words like must, because of, most likely, some, and or. We will discuss all of these important terms in depth in future lessons. As we briefly discussed in the initial lesson, the challenge of these words is that they are words we use every day without thinking, and in real life, even when we don't realize it. They are words that change in meaning per the context. If a waitress asks, "Would you like soup or salad?" it's generally rude for you to respond both. She's asking one or the other. But if you see a sign that says, "To get in the movie, you must be over 17 or with an adult," both of those can be true, right? I mean, you can be over 17 and with an adult, or you can be. But here's another or statement that's buried in there is that you can be under 17 and accompanied by an adult and get into the movie, right? You understand that in this instance, being both over 17 and with an adult is perfectly fine. Yeah. Lawyers have to be very careful about the exact meaning of words. The LSAT, as you might imagine, requires that you utilize a specific and consistent, that is, not contextual understanding of words, such as or, that define specific reasoning relationships. This always brings to mind uh, Bill Clinton during his impeachment, like asking, can a star, what is the definition of is, right? That's something that, like has been uh, burned into the memories of anyone who has paid attention to politics, but, like it's almost elevated to like kind of a pop culture thing, you know. can a star? What is the definition of is? So, um, yeah, and I mean, like Bill Clinton being one of those lawyers that was pretty skilled at what he does. I mean, managed to get himself out of an impeachment. Really, like so. Yeah, I mean, knowing what the knowing your game, you got to know your game. uh, right, such as or that define specific reasoning relationships. The word or on the LSAT has just one meaning, and it does not change whether we are talking about soup or movies. For LSAT problems, it is essential that you pay the most attention to the words that define reasoning relationships, and that you have a specific and consistent understanding of what these words mean. I think Kim mentioned earlier, like in the previous chapter, that like or, for example, in the test is almost always making an exclusionary statement unless it is specifically stated within the stimulus or probably within the stem, one of the two, right? That uh, that or being used is not a exclusionary statement, such as the movie theater statement, right? Or the state ID or passport statement when boarding a plane, right? Either one of those is acceptable. A passport or a driver's license. I mean, you could have both on you, and you could present both, but you don't need to present both. You can present one or the other, not exclusionary. But that's the exception to the rule. Is what the point is. That and it according to Kim, like it could be stated explicitly that it's not exclusionary. So otherwise, or is almost always exclusionary. That it's an or statement, soup or salad, and the logic of porque no los dos doesn't follow. Many logical reasoning questions are about random or little known subjects, and they often include terminology that you will not be totally comfortable with. But your attitude towards this should be as it would be towards the subjects in a tough math word problem. You should see the challenging topics and terminology as distraction, not as the keys to your success. The test writers don't expect you to know anything about these subjects, and even if you did know something, it wouldn't matter. They don't care how expansive your vocabulary is, and they don't care about your ability to guess at the meanings of words you don't know. The fact that an LSAT question is more about some strange philosophical stance or some new scientific theory is of little consequence. Going back to elementary school, whether the dogs in question were greyhounds or pink puppies, your focus should be on the more important issues of how many puppies are there, not what breed or color the puppies are. Logical reasoning tests reasoning ability. Logical reasoning questions are also designed to test your reasoning ability. That is, your ability to judge or form an opinion about the information you are given in the stimulus. So, logical reasoning prompts and questions are also a measure of your ability to judge or form an opinion about the information. We'll say the important information given in the stimulus. We'll narrow this to questions. So, logical reasoning questions are also a measure of your ability to judge or form an opinion about the information given in the stimulus, because the stimulus is a specific part of the question. By far, the most important reasoning relationships for us to judge are those that exist between a point and the support given for that point in an argument. All right. Let's imagine some different ways they could test our ability to evaluate this relationship within arguments. Perhaps they could sometimes give us arguments that are valid, arguments for which the reasoning does justify the conclusion, and sometimes give us arguments that are not valid, and they could test our ability to decipher which ones are valid and which ones are not. Other questions could be set up much as a case is presented to a jury. We would be given a set of facts, and it would be up to us to determine whether the information proves the conclusion, doesn't prove it, or presents some sort of deadlock. And before we go on to the next page, there's a side note here, or two side notes actually. An argument consists of a point and reasons given to support that point. When we are asked to critically evaluate reasoning in an argument, our job will always be to see why reasons don't justify a point. So, yeah, when the stem or the question directs you to critically evaluate the reasoning in an argument, the job will always be to see why reasons don't justify the point, is to argue against the point being made. It's important to know that neither of these scenarios actually represent what will be asked of you on the LSAT. When we are asked to evaluate the reasoning of an argument, it is always in terms of a very specific task. Our job is always to evaluate and understand why the reasons given do not justify the point that is being made. Let's read that again. Our job is always, actually, let's type it out even. Our job is always to evaluate and understand why, not way, why the reasons given What's scratching your thumb? My dog keeps scratching his face. need to probably check that out, but in a minute. Understand why the reasons given do not justify the point that is made. For every one of these questions, your understanding of why the support doesn't justify the conclusion will be your primary gauge for evaluating right and wrong answers. Logical reasoning problems do not ever require you to differentiate between valid and invalid reasoning within arguments. Instead, they test your ability to see in a very specific way why arguments are not valid. If you are good at this, you will be good at solving logical reasoning problems. That's important to note too, probably just for myself, for my own understanding, because I think maybe sometimes I probably do fall into this trap. So, logical reasoning problems. We're talking about a formal thing here. Logical reasoning problems uh, do not ever require you to differentiate between valid and invalid reasoning within arguments. Instead, they test your ability to see in a very specific way why arguments are not valid. If you are good at this, you will be good at solving logical reasoning problems. Logical reasoning tests mental discipline. We can define mental discipline as the ability to stay focused on the specific task at hand. Success on the LSAT requires extreme mental discipline, and the test. I think we write these down? I think I wrote them down like in my own words, but let's go back and so there's three lessons to be learned here, right? Logical reading questions, logical reading questions, test reading ability, right? Logical reasoning questions, test reasoning ability, and then logical reasoning tests mental discipline. So we can, I'll read it again. We can define mental discipline as the ability to stay focused on the specific task at hand. Success on the LSAT requires extreme mental discipline, and the test is downright cruel to those who don't have it. You need to be able to stay focused and not let your thoughts wander, not to reevaluate things. You need to be like focused on the task at hand always without deviation. In terms of developing mental discipline, we give ourselves a huge head start when we have a clear understanding of the job and of the best way to achieve it. But mental discipline takes far more than knowing. It requires sticking to that task, focusing on the argument, rather than confusing background information, strengthening or weakening that argument, rather than just the point being made, not jumping to conclusions or forming opinions when the question specifically asks you not to judge, and remembering exactly what you are looking for in the right answer as you eliminate the wrong ones. Right? So I mean like I don't have good mental discipline, I think this is something that hopefully this book can help me train my mind to like eliminate those kind of like straight thoughts and background noise like within my own subconscious even to um focus hone that mental discipline. Your mental discipline is a fairly good representation of the power of your brain, just like the ability to lift certain amount of weight is a fairly good representation of the power in your arms. Exercising those arm muscles is the best way to develop their strength. Working questions correctly over and over again is the best way to develop mental discipline. Let's type that out. Working questions correctly I almost want to emphasize correctly because I think you know like I've talked about like especially in the earlier recording of this is that training correctly in everything that you do is the best way to develop the skills and experience necessary to be competent. There's no, I mean, like, there really is no other way because you can train and work incorrectly, and over time, uh, you will be incompetent at your job, at the task at hand, whatever you're trying to do or accomplish, because you've done it incorrectly and you developed an incorrect view and experience base for that task. And it's going to take a lot to unlearn that and learn the correct way. So training yourself correctly is so important. It's the most fundamental importance. Uh, Over and over again. We don't just do it once and call it good. We practice and train every day, every practice. Like a pitcher or a batter, or like you can use any sport analogy you want, I guess, like, but I mean, like, when it comes to batting and batting practice, you're going to get better when you show up to practice every day and you work with your coach and train correctly on keeping your eye on the ball, on your stance, on your swing, right? all all of those things that matter in movement and coordination over and over again is the best way to develop mental discipline, as with any other skill and base of experience we're building. And then there's two side notes here. Logical reasoning tests reading ability, reasoning ability, and mental discipline. we can define mental discipline as the ability to stay focused on the task at hand. Maybe I'll include that too. We can define mental discipline as the ability to stay focused on the task at hand. I think I've even stated it that way, like probably verbatim myself. All right, so here in the book, there's a graphic called the constellation of questions. And here's the text, at least to describe the graphic. Here's a visual representation of the various types of questions that you are likely to see in each logical reasoning section of the exam. We'll discuss these using more formal language later. Each type of question is unique, but as you can see, they are related. The numbers represent the total of that question type that you are likely to see in a single logical reasoning section. Okay. And then the majority of them are argument based questions that require us to be critical, right? So we're being critical, we're trying to find the flaw in the argument. And then there are some that argument based questions that do not require you to identify the flaw, but support the reasoning. So be aware of that also. But some identify the flaw though, but ask you to strengthen the argument from the question stem. So, all right, I guess I'll read the main. So there is a main part of argument-based questions that require us to be critical is identify the flaw, but then there are branches. So, the branches go as this: sufficient assumption, conform to or supporting principle, match the flaw, basic assumption, strengthen the argument, required assumption, weaken the argument, and then there's another branch from identify the flaw that method of reasoning. But then from the method of reasoning, there's three other branches: match the reasoning, identify the conclusion, or identify the role. And those are argument-based questions that do not require us to be critical. And then there's outliers. There's a minority of questions that are not arguments, and those can be inference, explain the discrepancy, give an example, identify the disagreement. And we're almost at 2 hours, but bear with me because we're going to go over the answers now to the previous 4 questions in this. So we have our sample question solutions. Next to each of the 4 questions from before are the hypothetical real-time thoughts of top scoring test taker. Keep in mind that many of these thoughts would likely not be as conscious and explicit as I've made them here. In real time, many of these thoughts, for example, how to approach each of the following or each of the different question types, would be automatic and intuitive rather than explicitly laid out. So again, like training your subconscious to do the heavy lifting so that your conscious brain, your conscious mind can look at what's in front of us and not have to explain to ourselves consciously like every step. Also note that the solutions I write are not meant to be absolute ways of thinking. No two test takers will think of every question the same way, and I won't even think of the same question exactly the same way if I happen to look at it on 2 different days, right? So take these solutions to be examples of effective problem solving. You don't have to solve problems the same way they're solved here, but you should be able to use these solutions to reflect on and gauge your own experience, right? So, and we have question 1. Most antidepressant drugs cause weight gain, while dieting can help reduce the amount of weight gained. While taking such antidepressants, some weight gain is unlikely to be preventable. The following are the information above strongly supports which of the following? Physician should not prescribe any antidepressant drug for a patient if that patient is overweight. People who are trying to lose weight should not ask their doctors for an antidepressant drug. At least some patients taking antidepressant drugs gain weight as a result of taking them. The weight gain experienced by patients taking antidepressant drugs should be attributed to a lack of dieting. All patients taking antidepressant drugs should diet to maintain their weight. Looking at the question stem, need to figure out what's wrong with the argument. Start by finding the conclusion. Points. Claim that surest way to increase correctness of beliefs is to cut out wrong ones and not add new ones is mistaken. Why? Because it would leave us with fewer and fewer beliefs, and we need many beliefs to survive. Oh wait, I think I got misdirected here. Right, so we're still talking about question 1, but I jumped down to a paragraph for question 2. All right, so my mistake. Continuing back to question 1, answer. Looking at the question stem, you need to use stimulus to justify an answer choice. Stimulus is about relationship between antidepressant drugs and weight gain. Antidepressant drugs cause weight gain, and you can try to do some stuff to combat the weight gain, but sometimes you can't avoid it. Okay, ready for the answers. Going to look for reasons why 4 answers are not supported by the text in the stimulus. The stimulus says nothing about what a physician should or should not do. Who says weight is more important than emotional health anyway? Exactly. That's my argument also for answer A. So A is obviously not provable, and B is not provable for pretty much the same reason. Exactly. We're told of a relationship between antidepressants and weight gain, but the stimulus doesn't say anything about what anyone should do exactly. C seems to justify. Keep the answer. Yep. So C seems to be the correct one. D can't be proved by the text. Dieting helps reduce weight gain, but it's not the sole contributing factor. E is clearly wrong for the same reasons. Exactly. A and B were and do not, and we don't know what people should do. All patients taking such drugs, maybe weight is not their main priority. Exactly. Their mental health is their priority. That's why they're seeking out the doctor, right? And or the doctor, isn't following a contraindication of, oh, this person's overweight and therefore their mental health is less important than their weight. you know, like anyway, I've only got C. Let's make sure I can justify it. Most drugs cause weight gain, and some of this weight gain is unlikely to be preventable. So yes, it does seem that at least some patients taking the drugs gain weight as a result of them. C is correct. Yes, that's exactly what I thought also. It looks like I got question two wrong though. All right, so we'll read through it. Some statisticians claim that the surest way to increase the overall correctness of the total set of one's belief is never change that set except by rejecting a belief that when adequate evidence. Huh. All right. Yeah. No. Never change that set except by rejecting a belief when given adequate evidence against it. However, if this were the only rule one followed, then whenever one were presented with any kind of evidence, one would have to either reject some of one's beliefs or else leave one's beliefs unchanged. But then, over time, one could only have fewer and fewer beliefs. Since we need many beliefs in order to survive, the statistician's claim must be mistaken. The statisticians claim must be mistaken. The argument is most vulnerable to criticism on the ground that it presumes, without providing any justification, that the surest way of increasing the overall correctness of the total set of one's beliefs must not hinder one's ability to survive. Uh, B neglects the possibility that even while following the statistician's rule, one might also accept new beliefs when presented with some kinds of evidence. C overlooks the possibility that some large sets of beliefs are more correct overall than some small sets of beliefs. D takes for granted that one should accept some beliefs related to survival when even when given adequate evidence against them. E takes it for granted that the beliefs we need in order to have many beliefs must all be correct beliefs. So, looking at the question stem, need to figure out what's wrong with the argument. Start by finding the conclusion. Point. Claim that surest way to increase correctness of beliefs is to cut out wrong ones and not add new ones is mistaken. Why? Because it would leave us with fewer and fewer beliefs, and we need many beliefs to survive. What does survival have to do with the correctness of beliefs? That's the main problem. The author is using a premise about what we need to survive to try to prove a point about what does or doesn't lead to overall correctness, whatever that is. Okay, ready to eliminate choices. A. Looks similar to what I thought about. Leave it. Confused as to what impact B would have, but know that it's not the flaw. Has little to do with the point and support. I think I felt the same way about B. C also has very little to do with the point and support. D is about beliefs related to survival. That's different from needing a lot of beliefs related to survival, and it doesn't relate directly to the issue of increasing correctness of beliefs. And E is not what is wrong with the argument either. It's not saying the beliefs we need must be correct. He's not it's not what is wrong with the argument either. He's not saying the beliefs we need must be correct. And I think that I applied my own reasoning, my own incorrect reasoning to that. So A is the only possibility time to take a careful look. So A, and we'll mark that in a different color. Blue. The author is saying something isn't the surest way to increase correctness because it hinders one's ability to survive, and he's wrong for thinking that. So we were trying to deconstruct this argument, and I did that incorrectly. Ooh boy. Well, that's why we're doing practice, right? That's why I need to I definitely need to sharpen my skills, I think. Um so we'll continue on. Uh Reading ahead, I definitely made some mistakes in judgment and logical reasoning, but 3. Several critics have claimed that any contemporary poet who writes formal poetry that is rhymed and metered, is performing a politically conservative act. That is plainly false. Consider Molly Peacock and Marilyn Hacker, 2 contemporary poets whose poetry is almost exclusively formal, and yet who are themselves politically progressive feminists. The conclusion drawn above follows logically if one of the following is assumed. Oh, and I okay. No, I'm starting to see how these are constructed. So the conclusion that we're trying to reach is it follows logically if one of the following is assumed. No one who is a feminist is also politically conservative. No poet who writes unrhymed or unmetered poetry is politically conservative. No one who is politically progressive is capable of performing a politically conservative act. Anyone who sometimes writes poetry that is not politically conservative never writes poetry that is politically conservative. The content of a poet's work, not the poet's form, is the most decisive factor in determining what political consequences, if any, the work will have. I answered E, but let's read through the reasoning, the logical form that the author takes to arrive at a conclusion. Need to fix the hole in the argument and make the argument airtight. First, need to find the point. Point is, it's false to think writing any formal poetry is a conservative act. Right. We came. I think I miss. Why? 2 poets who do so are progressive feminists. So what if? So what if they are feminists? Maybe they are feminists, but they happen to write poems about flowers and fairies. I need an answer that specifically shows formal poetry not being a conservative act. A doesn't give us anything about the poetry, right? B is about other types of poets. It doesn't matter. C is interesting, would mean that these progressive feminists can't write conservative stuff. Leave it. D is a bit tricky, but we don't need to prove that these feminists would never write politically conservative poetry, just that they could write some that isn't conservative, right? Uh, and E doesn't do nearly enough to make our conclusion airtight. Okay, so E kind of is on the right track, but it's not an airtight argument. So that only leaves C. Time to take a careful look. If C is true, since these two poets are progressive, that means they cannot write conservative poetry. That means the formal poetry they write is not conservative, and that is what I need to prove the point. C is correct. So C. The higher the altitude, the thinner the air. Since Mexico City's altitude is higher than that of Panama City, the air must be thinner than Mexico than in Mexico City than in Panama City. Which of the following arguments is most similar in its reasoning to the argument above? As one gets older, one gets wiser. Since Henrietta is older than her daughter, Henrietta must be wiser than her daughter. That doesn't follow. I thought B was the most correct answer, but I don't. Apparently, D doesn't, or B doesn't follow either. The more egg whites used and the longer they are beaten. Oh, because of time. I understand now. The fluffier the meringue. Since Lydia used more egg whites in her meringue, but then the statement doesn't continue to follow. Also, since Lydia used more egg whites in her meringue than Joseph used in his, Lydia's meringue must be fluffier than Joseph's. Yeah, okay. See the and like yeah, that's why this test is hard, right? You're trying to make these answers like under pressure. I was taking my time, but I mean like was still under some pressure of time to try to move the test along and to find a correct conclusion, but I flawed my logic. Uh, the people who run the fastest marathons these days are faster than the people who ran the fastest marathons 10 years ago. Charles is a marathon runner, so Charles must run faster marathons these days than he did 10 years ago. None of that statement even follows. So, the older a tree, the more rings it has. And I talked myself out of this answer, but apparently this is the correct one. The tree in Lou's yard is older than the tree in Teresa's yard. Therefore, the tree in Lou's yard must have more rings than does the tree in Teresa's yard. But we're looking for something. But we're looking for the argument that's the most similar, right? And B is not similar. And E, the bigger the vocabulary or language has, the harder it is to learn. English is not, or English is harder to learn than Italian. Therefore, English must have a bigger vocabulary than Italian. Okay, so we're looking to match the arguments. Argument higher equals thinner. X equals higher, therefore thinner. Got it. Time to eliminate mismatches. A has a similar structure. Leave it. B's got two conditions: more egg whites and longer beaten. That's different from original cut. Yeah, no, I understand that now. C doesn't seem right, but can't quite figure out why. Leave it. D looks good too. Leave it. E reverses characteristic and consequences cut. So we have to look at A, C, and D. C looked the worst, so start there. The part about Charles getting faster is suspicious. Original is about comparing two different places, not same place at different moments. Other problems with C2, like I don't know if Charles is one of the fastest runners. A actually has a similar problem. The premise is about changes within one person, not differences between two people. And then both A and C are actually not great matches. So down to D. Okay, D is older equals more rings. That matches. X older, therefore more rings. That's a good match. D. That makes sense. That makes perfect sense, actually. Once it's explained that way. All right, so I got one problem correct and then three wrong. I'm I'm not doing so hot on the average test taking part of 50%. So got some time to sharpen. We got some time to sharpen. And then the signs of mastery. Now that you've gotten a little sample of the problem solving process, let's broaden things out and define in general the characteristics of a top scorer in the logical reasoning section. A top scorer has a correct and usable understanding of the tasks that each type of question presents. Let's actually write this out. Has a correct and usable understanding of the task that each type of question presents. Intuitively prioritizes and correctly orders issues that most directly relate to the task. Wastes little time on thoughts and decisions that do not directly relate to the task. Knows when to look for an argument and when not to. Knows when to critique the argument and when not to. Is always able to identify the main points. Is always able to identify the support. Is almost always able to figure out why the support doesn't justify the conclusion. Knows how much he's supposed to be able to anticipate about the right answer. Is often able to predict the right answer. Is always able to predict the characteristics of wrong answers. Is able to readjust when an answer tips her off that she's missed something. As question type specific systems for eliminating wrong choices. Has question type specific systems for confirming the right choice. Expects a high level of certainty before pulling the trigger on an answer. That generally means knowing at least one absolute reason why each wrong answer is wrong, and having a very strong sense of why the right answer is. All right, and then the top scorer does not need the ability to retain a huge volume of information. Like the story math problems we learned in elementary school. We don't need to be accountable to every piece of information in the problem. There are clues to help Prioritize. What must be focused on? Familiarity with a wide range of random and technical subject matter. As discussed, the subject matter generally serves as the background, not relevant to the argument or support. Not relevant to the point of the argument or the support. Random bouts of creativity. Logical reasoning questions reward flexibility. But they do not reward creativity. Oh, come on. Questions require a very specific and literal understanding of the text and your text. And they reward organized and disciplined thinking. Not flashes of brilliance. Or novel ideas. All right. So we're 2.5 hours in. I think that'll leave it there this morning. So that concludes this section of lesson 2 today. We did cover quite a bit from pages 29 to 40, and took a lot of notes, learned some flaws in my thinking. Definitely went in a little overconfident too, so that's something else that I need to work on is tempering my true ability from my perceived ability. So on that note, bye bye, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. If you watched for all 2.5 hours, then hopefully you got something out of it. Bye. Peace.